player will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. We just got Exdeath this week, a continuation of the Final Fantasy V collaboration, a unit that a lot of people have known about ahead of time just because it was so easy to get excited for him. And so today we have him live in game. I've finally done my analysis for him and eager to getting my thoughts, whether you should pull, all about the intricacies of his kit. But without further ado, today's review, pretty standard things. It'll be the character overview. We'll look through the stats, the commander effect, the report card to summarize some of those individual talking points, my general thoughts overall, a should you pull recommendation, and then we'll get into the intricacies of his kit, the TMR, some of the job-based vision card crossover, all the normal topics. Kicking things off here, he is a brand new Dark unit added to the game with the unique main job of Dark Warlock. They gave him the subjobs of Rune Knight and Green Mage. He is part of the Staff Black Mage category, so he does equip staffs as a magic damage dealer. He does equip armor helms and accessories like his image. He does equip heavier, bulky overall equipment, which feeds exactly into his persona as a very bulky mage. He does have a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit, and no doubt a 97 faith unit. Now, max range is 5 squares away on the job. He does have 1 AoE and 3 single target abilities. From a resistance standpoint, does have 2 negatives here, the 5% to strike and the 10% to pierce. Really not all that egregious. You can correct for him in a variety of ways, but the other ones, 15% to slash and missile and 20% to magic, certainly really good starting spots versus what the most popular damage types are in the game at the moment. Now, as a 97 faith unit, you do want to be mindful of what he can be afflicted by and not afflicted by from an ailment perspective. He does have the innate 50% resistance to both blind and immobilize. The immobilize obviously great for those Shureka matchups, and even blind has kind of come and gone between Sodali and the Riku Timar, things of that nature. You do have the 10% to slow as well. Honestly, pretty topical status elements. So overall, I do like what they gave him here. The mastery ability, they gave him 20% reaction block rate innately and 15% reduction of all magical damage taken. That includes the slash type attacks from someone like Gilgamesh, from the Ice Gilgamesh, who is a magic scaling slasher. You also have those follow-up attacks. That includes all of that. So really great mastery ability there. The Dream ability, they gave him some extra bulk with the 15% HP, 10% unit res, and 15% magical AoE wide resistance. So that's a mitigation versus those larger diamond type attacks. Now, the commander effects here, he is a Guild War commander, so that should raise some eyebrows immediately as some potentially good competitive value. For dark units in a team, when he is the commander, they get Dark Attack 15 and Spirit of 10, and the categories for him are Sword Warrior, Great Sword, and Staff Black Mage. They'll get 15% HP, 10% AoE resistance penetration, and 20% blind resistance, certainly very handy at the moment. Now, the in-game ability is that those units, when they fall below 70%, for 3 turns, they will gain a 10% regen and technically get 15 healing power up, which will help the potency of that regen, and obviously all of the other healing that they might do as well. Now, getting into the stats here, base stats, this actually did kind of surprise me just a smidge. Stat-wise, he's fine. He is technically like a category below where many of these more recent units are. Surprisingly, his 8 base HP is not in a spot that I just imagined it would be. It's certainly still fine, trust me. We're talking about negligible amounts of points here, but even the base magic, not in the top tiers, and the base dexterity is pretty average. The base luck is fine, definitely worthy of the 5th anniversary power creep, but overall, nothing weak here. I was a little bit surprised that he was technically in some of these lower buckets that I just would have predicted based off what I thought about the unit. All in all, though, I don't think it actually matters. He does get a fair amount of HP from that mastery ability. He does get some extra magic from the board nodes. He does certainly salvage the agility and the dexterity and the luck stat a fair bit. So overall, total stats, he's absolutely fine. When we look at some of these other metrics, total agility with the 15% and 8% main and sub-slot vision cards, he does clock in around that 83 agility with no passives equipped. When you do equip a passive, he gets up to around 90. I will say, though, you may not always, and in fact probably likely will not, have that agility passive active, so you can kind of think of him here in that same bucket of 83 agility, so it's right about on the average. We'll talk about that more on the report card and the abilities. For the other stats, the innate critical hit rate, not a strong point of his, and the crit avoidance rate is average. It's rather lackluster. Nothing really special. It's not bad, but just average. The innate accuracy, though, definitely is also a step behind here. He's definitely lower innately than what most units come out as, and although he does have an accuracy passive, which I do think you'll have on most of the time, even then it kind of puts him toward the bottom of the gradient here for where some of the more accurate innate characters are. That being said, I do think you can imagine him here on this orange line that you will likely have the accuracy passive on most of the time. And from a pseudo evade perspective, he does kind of clock in at the bottom of that gradient. This meant a lot more 8 months ago. I don't think this is really all that great from a current day perspective, not only because the power creep of the game, everyone on average is more accurate, but now that we have Riku and Venera, everyone is building more accuracy on average. And so since people are gearing for those higher evade units, he's not really going to have the opportunity to catch anybody off guard. I'm not saying he can't, I just don't think it's as likely as you'll find out. And the report card here, his overall effective HP actually is an S. He's near the absolute top of the charts, basically number one or close to it from a DPS perspective. He's got no defense or spirit, no AoE res, but he does have the 10 unit res, the 15 magic AoE wide res. He technically can get 15 physical AoE wide res from his Trials of Reckoning item. That's not included in my calculations, but honorable mention. He does also come with 12% all element res, which absolutely bumps this up, and that 15% magic reduction as we saw on the mastery ability. And the survivability is an A. He's got a 4-hit general barrier, the 30 unit res, 10% regen. He is re-raise capable and can seal enemy re-raise removal. He gets another 15% element resistance on buff, and his sequential ability does give him 20 spirit in the mid-fight as well. He can get even higher element res, 5% on his weapon, and 8% physical damage reduction to all physical damage types, with 20 debuff weakening on a buff, and he does have on his weapon the capability to not have his CT broken or CT dropped, which I think is slightly a component of survivability when you talk about getting lapped by units and maybe taking an extra hit that you shouldn't. Not being able to have your CT broken certainly does help in that regard. Now, the damage for me is an A-. Innately, he's got the 40 Spirit Pen on a passive that you have to equip. No magic penetration, but you do get 30 on an ability. We'll talk more about how you can get more of that type of penetration soon. He's got 40 unit resistance penetration, though certainly the bar now for many of these select 2 units. No imperils, but he does have shell removal, the Shell 2.0 removal, which is in-game called the reduction of magical type damage. He does have a magic barrier break, and he does have doom and poison access within the kit. So even if you're not doing a ton of damage, if you can land a doom and enemy just dies 4 turns later, you might as well count that as a form of damage. Now, agility, I am going lower here on the B-, if only because, as I mentioned, I don't think he'll have that agility percent passive on. If he does, he's certainly an A-. He's relatively competitive with the other units, but without it, he does drop down a tier. And I'm sorry, I had an egregiously bad typo there. The accuracy is a B-. That's not supposed to be the A-. He does have the mid-type accuracy, but he does have a 100% hit on his main ability he'll likely be using, so I wouldn't worry about those, pseudo-evade units. It's really just a high evade that he's going to not be able to really hit, but does have that 20% accuracy passive. He is a pseudo evade unit himself, and Staff Black Mage does have some good vision card support with the luck percent vision cards to enable that. Again, not that it's the way to play him, but it's certainly there. He does get a D for the movement though, no move or jump capability. The auto ease of use for me is an A, where it's really easy buffs, AI, nothing complex about the kit. We'll talk more about that soon too. The game disruption for me is an A, because he's an amazing unit to go with Shrek in the top meta. And the Commander and the TMR also have some great upsides for overall game disruption for what people can now put into their potential teams. The passives are a B- to me. You have to be kind of choosy with his passives. They're fine. They're not amazing. They're good, though. They're adequate for what he needs. The counter ability for me is a C. It's a lower percent chance. And it's got decent enough utility, I guess, but really not an oppressive counter ability either. It's kind of lackluster. The overall dropping kit, though, is an A- for great functionality. I like the Doom utilization. Very tanky, very self-sufficient. They chose the right element for him. For a final grade of an A, and he is a stellar unit that thrives with Shrek at defining a new potential meta. No, I don't think he's not without some counterplay and some downsides, but he obviously is very powerful, and honestly, he benefits from the function of some absolutely top-tier vision cards in the game, in addition to the fact that Shreka is still just an absolutely bonkers unit, that when you just combine the game balance factors, he starts off hitting the ground running really fast. That being said, JP has already introduced a unit that can theoretically show some counterplay to him in Mavia, the Ice Bow unit. So they've already started to introduce some potential counters, but we have not seen the impact of her yet in terms of putting a dent into what he does on the JP side of the game. Now, for my general thoughts, the Vision card is a bit of a must. I'll just say that straight up so people don't forget that. He only has the 30 magic res pen innately after a certain ability. The Vision card not only gives him 42% extra magic res pen, but adds some significant bulk utility across a variety of different party stats. The spear penetration for me is something to also keep in mind. Without equipping his passive for it, he has none innately, so that is a way to mitigate his damage and a way for you to fudge your own Exdeath by not equipping that passive, not getting the damage upside of it. He does have some good new gen damage mitigation removal though. He can remove Shell on hit. He's got 2 different abilities that can remove Shell 2.0. He's got the magic barrier break and a triple hit, which when you consider concurrent hits are also a form of barrier break in itself. He does also do extra damage versus the Sodily teams on a select 2, where it does a higher modifier for units that have the absorb HP buff, which Sodily hands out to the party. So there's some really topical things here that he does for damage overall. The poison and doom status elements obviously are great for the current sustain meta. You know, we see a lot of these fights just go on forever because the healers just keep everybody up. But if you put a doom counter on it, you can basically secure those kills regardless of what the enemy healer wants to do at that point. He is a really bulky unit with some nice regen uptime. He's going to be in that 13 to 15,000 HP range depending upon reincarnations. So you're looking at anywhere from like 1,500 to 2,000 healing per turn, depending on your healing power. And it's nice that he can give that regen to allies as well, so it's not just himself. He also has some really great debuff weakening potential. He does have 20 on a potential passive. I don't think you're going to have that on most of the time, though. That's his agility percent passive. But he does at least have 20% on his self buff, and he's got access to either 8% or 10% from the Dawn Trail vision card that just came out, or the Shinryu vision card if you're putting them in the sub slots. And that does help in particular with things like healing power down, where you can weaken the potency of that healing power down. That way he can maintain his regen uptime. It's nice he's got 2 different elemental less attacks, which means you can bypass anybody stacking up dark resistance or all element res as well. He is slightly exposed to Pierce and Strike, but those aren't legitimate types of damage to worry about quite yet. And it's really not that bad. The accuracy, though, obviously is mid without the guaranteed hit, but he does have some interesting sub-job TP abilities in case that hit rate is 0. We'll talk about that in the job section. And he really is beholden to that select 2 range on his main ability, because he doesn't have, I don't know how to describe this, there's not much battlefield-wide damage targeting patterns. That sounds odd to say, but the long and short of what I mean is, there's no diamond abilities, there's no cross shape abilities. He's really just kind of limited to what he can hit on the battlefield. That doesn't make it bad. It's just something to think about from an X's and O's perspective. Now, the should you pull, my answer is yes. And this is one of the reasons why we were tempering expectations around a unit like Gilgamesh, where a lot of people were like, oh my god, Gilgamesh is a great unit, why shouldn't you pull? Because the answer is Exdeath is likely a better value for account. He's an amazing limited unit that comes into a really stacked staff red mage category with the vision cards, with Shureka, that everyone at this point has really gotten more access to with the 5th anniversary 120 unit selects. Even this week, the Lunar New Year, you can pick up Shureka for 2k paid. It's absolutely awesome. He's very user-friendly in how to build and use as well. You have no like move or jump headaches, bait, not bait, no cast time math, no conflicting AI or damage priorities, no sub-jobs that confuse the buff priority or what you should be using for attacks. It's very, very simple in that regard, and the TMR for him is at minimum a great account addition, as well as the Guild War Commander effect. Those 2 things alone can add a lot of value to your account, and although I had mentioned he does need his vision card, that's an amazing account addition as well. That is an absolute power creep driving vision card. So if you pick him up in this vision card, you're setting your account up for some relative competitive play for this foreseeable future. Obviously, overall, a great value. And I never reference the JP meta at all in terms of these presentations. What we're seeing here is the top 10 offense on the top and defense on the bottom for JP Guild War over the last 2 to 3 weeks or so. And what you can see, he's the single lone dark line here. And while he has trended downward just ever so slightly on offense, he's still one of the top picks. But on defense here, he's so easy to slot into that Shureka Lucille team that it's just an easy play for most accounts to put him in and immediately get good value on. That was never going to be a surprise. Now we get into the job itself, the passive abilities. This top one you are always going to have on 100% of the time. It's really debatable what the second two are, and now I personally think you should always have Sharp Mind on. The only time I would have it off is if you legitimately need that 12% agility for some kind of turn order rotation or something very specific in your matchup where you're testing and noticing something. But otherwise, if you don't have that Spirit Pen of the accuracy, that's a massive stat loss for him. So I think Evil Spirits and Sharp Mind are the two to really stick with. From the counter abilities, again, this one I'm kind of whatever on. 30% chance to proc is fine enough, but it's not a preemptive ability. It's got a Dispel on it, but there's enough Dispel Seal in the game that by the time he uses this, I'm not even confident that's actually going to dispel anything. So it's okay. I don't like the other ones either. The main job buffs, his teammate buff here is the 50% damage barrier of both physical and magic types, the unit res, the regen, also the re-raise seal, because his self buff is where he gives himself re-raise. It's also Dispel Shell on hit and some extra all element res. So these are two excellent buffs to make sure that he has online. Now the main job here, he does scale off magic stat, his dexterity, agility, and luck. They're all magic scaling attacks, but you will notice one of them is the elemental list, as I pointed out. He'll likely always open with this banish you from this dimension. It's only 3 casts, so just be wary of that, but it's the source of his magic res pen. It's his guaranteed hit. It's a modifier increase if the enemy has a damage absorb buff, like the Sodily buff that I'd mentioned. It also casts a sequential ability that is an attack and magic buff, as well as a spirit buff for 2 turns for himself and allies. And the coolest thing of all is the 25% chance to inflict doom. Now, while you can Truststone passive this away, as most of you know right now, we only have 6 Truststone passive slots, and we've already got a lot of ailments in those slots. So fitting in doom just for him, you're gonna want to, but it's gonna be a tough one. Nothing really crazy to mention with the rest of these, but you'll see here what I meant with the targeting patterns. Very unit damage oriented. He does have this small cross shape, which is a great ability, the magic barrier break. But yeah, all of these are instacast. I really like what they did here. For the limit break, it's another range 5 ability. It's a select 2, where you can remove Shell 2.0 and Dispel Re-Raise at that 240% modifier. This is a great limit break, and the nice thing about this is that it has the range height of 2. You'll notice most of these other abilities, it's only range height of 1, at least on his higher potency ability. So I like that the limit break has some extra flexibility for what different heights it can hit. Now the sub job, I'm probably equipping this sub job personally. This is such an interesting thing they did here with the Earthshaker. It's kind of just a callback to his ability in Final Fantasy V. Admittedly, I don't think he's ever going to use this unless very specifically he's in a group of 3 different enemies that he can hit all 3 of them at once, just because it's an earth type attack. He's got no earth attack modifiers, right? It's a typeless attack, so it's only going to use the man killer on magic attack for the modifier there. It's not going to scale off any magic attack modifiers. I think though, realistically, the most often time he'll use this is, again, in that group of enemies, but even then, this has friendly fire on it. So if you have a teammate nearby, he won't hit them with this. So for auto battle, the AI priority, I still like having this turned on because, again, he doesn't have many other AoEs in the kit, but I don't expect him to use it a lot. But I love this TP ability that if you consider, if he's got a 0% hit chance against some of these null sure hit high evade units, this is a select 2 that will dispel all buffs. It's got a chance to slow them, and he gives himself a physical and magical honeycomb barrier for a few turns. So I think the cool idea about this is that if his hit rate was 0 and he procced the null sure hit on the enemy, he can then use this ability after, dispel some buffs, gain some survivability, and basically wait it out, wait the null sure hit out, so that by the time it expires, he's still alive, and he can go right back in and use that guaranteed hit. So I think this is a really creative TP ability for him. The Root Knight subjob, I have nothing to say about this. I don't think this is a good subjob. Maybe for PvE with the negative dark resistance here. I don't like any of these abilities, though, for him personally. It does too many weird things from an AI perspective. But I think the Green Mage is probably the only other thing I'd consider. And kind of similar to that TP ability of the main subjob, I think Deprotect or Deshell is another interesting one that if the enemy had, if you have a 0% hit chance on them, you can still cast this ability on them and at least get that Imperil for someone like Shreka to follow up on with them, or whatever other unit you're pairing with. So I would tend to have this Deshell on here. The Imperil ability itself, you're not going to use this unless you have a Truststone passive, and even then, you're probably going to want the Orochi Esper, so super niche that you would ever have this on. But I would keep it on and let the AI decide for itself. Honestly, though, I'm probably sticking with the Dark Warlock subjob and just using these abilities and keeping it simple. Now, the TMR review, this is an S tier TMR. It's absolutely gross how good this is. Not only does it come in, again, with that 5 agility, which is really nice to have just as a general stat stick, but the ability itself is the Protect and Shell 2.0 for 2 hits. It's the 25% reduction of all physical and magic damage types. It's an increase of move +1 and 25% agility for 4 turns. 2 casts, this accessory is absolutely amazing. Now, for the job-based vision cards, this again is part of the strength of what he's coming into. This is one of the best rainbow classes overall. They have very strong synergies with Book, with Greatsword, with Katana, even with Bow here, despite the fact there's not many units in that class, but the vision card overlap is certainly there. But even then, Axe, Fist, Sword Warrior, and Sword Knight certainly have enough to connect some dots as well. So I think this is one of the strongest things about Staff Black Mage, and he is absolutely reaping the benefit of it. Now, for the unique equipment, his weapon itself, it's the 5% element res, the 8% physical damage down. It allows him so that he cannot have his CT broken. Overall, I like this weapon a lot. I'm using this majority of the time for him. And you also have a Trial of Reckoning item to consider. It's 10 unit res. You get a couple other ailment resistances here, but this is also a 15% magic buff as long as his health is above half, and it's the 15% physical AoE wide res. So I actually like this Trial of Reckoning item. I think there's some debates right now, and you'll see on the other clips, whether or not you use the Maximilian armor. The effect of this does not stack with his weapon 100% of the time, only if you fall below certain thresholds or not. So I think you could entertain using the Trial of Reckoning item or the Marshmallow or Alexandrite ring. I do think his weapon is best. I would keep the Wizard Rod on Shreka. Personally, I think his bulk is too big a piece of his character to give up some of the survivability of that. There are other alternative staff options, but I just don't think they're better. Now, the Espers, you can go 2 ways with him. You can go full offensive and just go for the really high modifiers, the great penetrations. These top 4 Espers certainly fit the bill, but you could go for some tankier options too, where Dark Siren, Greater Demon, and Dark Golem obviously are a little bit slower, don't have all the same modifiers, but certainly add some significant bulk in some variety of ways to him that I think you can play with either one, see what works best for you. And there are some Dark Esper alternatives, but I don't think they're superior to most of these. And then again, for the TMRs, the agility TMRs, to me, just given his agility, speed, innately, are probably the best. Even using a TMR buff may be unlikely. I would like him to use both of his main job buffs and not risk not being able to use one of them. Now, for my favorite teams, there's a lot, but a lot of them do revolve around Shreka. There's no surprise there. This top iteration is really straightforward. This isn't rocket science at this point. It's Exdeath, Shreka, and you can pick and choose what support you want. Summer Resnick is definitely the most consistent of the supports, but Lucille does have the haste, the chain resistance, the courage dispel capability. But I've even seen some fun teams with Lemuray, who is part of the staff Black Mage group, so she does reap the benefits of all the same vision cards. And although she does have the Hastica, which is similar to Lucille, you have the Quicken angle to allow Shreka or Exdeath to act multiple times in a row. Sometimes that's all you need to end a fight when you have their kind of firepower. So I like this top iteration of teams. The second one here is more of the mono dark variety. Not only is there the overlap with the mono dark cards, but Greatsword and Warrior, as we saw on that prior slide with the vision cards, Cypher, Pain, Veritas of the Dark all fit that bill. It really just depends on what you have access to. Which of these units do you have? Which of their vision cards do you have? I think you can mix and match some of these 3 units and still get some pretty good results. Definitely some high damage teams there. And then finally, this bottom iteration is virtually the same as the top, but you're opting for a tank instead of support. But Exdeath is a bulkier unit, and Shreka is not so much of a bulky unit, so she actually could use the either physical aura or the magic aura of either Strategist Aldoa, who is part of their group. She is Staff Red Mage. So she will work wonderfully with their vision cards, but Dario, being a Katana unit, also can. And so it really just depends on what kind of tank you want, what kind of utility you want, but there's a lot of really great options for Exdeath. Now for the Truststones here, I added some stuff. Hopefully it's a good improvement. Left side here, for me, I would just go HP. You could go Luck, but for me, I'm not even trying to hit those super high evade units. I would just rely on the guaranteed hit. You could entertain a defense or spirit set to amplify the regen healing, but that's a little more analytical than I want to get into at this time. For the status effects here on the left side, my personal 4 recommendations for the let's say, top meta overall would be Curse, where Sephiroth and Ramada do use that. Ramada's popping up a lot more with the new Gilgamesh unit. Stun, obviously very lethal from Venera. Berserk, Riku has it under Limit Break, Sephiroth has it under Subjob, the Vega TMR still can pop up every once in a while, and Sleep, Exia and Sephiroth as well under Subjob, as well as a variety of others like Ashen King Mont, his counter ability as Sleep. That those are the four. If you were to sub some of them out, like Venera's Stun, if you don't anticipate hitting Evade, I think you could go for either Disable, where Lucille, super popular obviously, or even Silence for Ashen King Mont, where he's still around in those mono Earth teams. Now, the right side, I would just stick with the Agility Truststone, and I think these top 5 are ones that you'll likely have on almost all the time. The Reaction Block 20 is subjective to what vision cards you're using. If you're using his vision card and the VV vision card, he's already got some Reaction Block innately that, with those 2 vision cards and his own innate Reaction Block rate, this is probably overkill, and you can probably put Accuracy 10, heck, even Dexterity 15 or Crit Rate 10. The cast time down 200, again, it's super niche. That's only if you're trying to use the Green Mage sub-job with the Imperil ability, and even that, you would want the Orochi Esper, which actually, low-key, not the worst Esper form. It's got the healing power, it's got that cast time down, it's got the magic attack nodes, it's got the agility on it. There's a lot of things to still like about that Esper, it's just not my favorite, and honestly very niche. But that's the overall Exdeath review. I mean, a lot of really great things to say about this unit. There's, as I mentioned, a unit in Mavia in the future that does seemingly have some counterplay to this kind of unit. We see units like Thancred and Nickel who have some games they can play with the unit res penetration of these units. And so there is some kind of counterplay that's slowly being built to them, but no doubt this is one of those units that you can literally just throw into a team that you're likely already using and still get immediate high impact value. And even then, as time goes on, once he maybe subsides strength wise and meta wise, you're still going to have that TMR, you're still going to have that commander ability for Guild War, and you're still going to have the vision card that you got to go with him. That vision card is going to age very well, I promise you. It's absolutely stacked on every single stat on the card. But that's everything for now. Again, I don't think this is a perfect unit, but I think it's a really high value, high impact unit for most people. But per usual, comments, critiques, criticisms, questions, throw it in the comment section below. Happy to hear your personal experiences so far if you've already built him in and are using him. Good luck pulling for those of you that are, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.